Imagine you spend 4 years and $80,000 getting a degree. You land the job. You show up. You do the work. You get the performance review. You get the 2% raise. You buy the work clothes. You commute 45 minutes each way. You eat lunch at your desk. And at some point, maybe around year 2, you realize you are not building anything. You are just being processed. Now, here is the weird part. That realization used to take people 20 years. It used to hit at 43. Now, it is hitting at 23. And the generation that is supposed to be feeding the corporate machine is quietly stepping off the conveyor belt entirely, not making a fuss, not writing ops, just leaving. So the question I want to answer today is, why is this happening now? What is actually driving it? And does it mean what everyone thinks it means? Because here is the thing. Most of the commentary on this topic is wrong. People are framing this as a value story, a work ethic story, a lazy generation story. It is none of those things. It is an incentive story. And when you look at the incentives, the math is obvious. The surprising part is that took this long. We are going to explain how the corporate employment machine actually works. Why it was designed the way it was. Why Gen Z is the first generation to encounter it with enough information to reject it. And why the exit is not just a vibe shift. It is a structural collapse that is already in motion. One metaphor to keep in mind for the entire video, the conveyor belt. I want you to think of corporate employment as a conveyor belt in a factory. You get on at one end. The belt moves you forward at a controlled speed. You cannot go faster than the belt. You cannot slow it down, and the factory owns the belt. This is going to matter later. Let us start with what is actually happening. Right now, nearly 38% of recent graduates are considering starting their own business. 32.5% are looking at gig work, and 28% are exploring freelance work. That is the ZipRecruiter data from early 2026. Think about what that means for a second. You are looking at a graduating class where the majority of people, when asked what they plan to do after graduation, do not say find a job at a company. They say they are going to build something, contract something, or freelance something. That has never happened before at this scale. And it is not just the fresh graduates. 52% of Gen Z professionals are already freelancing, meaning over half of this generation is already participating in the gig economy rather than traditional employment. Over half. That is not a trend. That is a structural alternative. That is a parallel economy that is already running. Now, before we explain why this is happening, I want to address the obvious wrong answer. The wrong answer is they don't want to work. More than half of Gen Z respondents cited the pursuit of higher income as a primary motivator for leaving corporate work. They want money. They just do not believe the conveyor belt delivers it efficiently anymore. And honestly, the math backs them up. Here is the first thing you need to understand about how the conveyor belt system works. The corporate salary structure was designed in an era when information was scarce. When you could not easily know what your coworker made. When you could not log onto a platform and find out what a company in another city was paying for the same role. When you could not in 30 minutes build a website, acquire a client, and invoice them without going through any intermediary. The entire architecture of salaries, titles, and promotions was built for an information-poor environment. The conveyor belt functioned because people did not know there was a way to get off. Now they do, and that changes everything. Let me give you a concrete math example, because this is where the conversation usually gets vague, and I do not like vague. Imagine someone, let us call him Marcus, gets a marketing job out of college. Starting salary $52,000 a year. He is good. He gets a 3% raise after year 1. That is $53,560. After year 3, if nothing goes wrong, maybe he is at $58,000 or $59,000. He cannot negotiate aggressively because he has no leverage. He cannot leave easily because he has been told he needs to build tenure. He is on the belt. Now, imagine his college roommate decides to freelance. She starts by charging $800 per project, doing the exact same type of marketing work. Month 1, she gets 2 clients. That is $1,600. Month 3, She has 4 recurring clients. And she raises her rates to $1,200 per project. She is now at $4,800 a month. That is $57,600 a year, and she has been freelancing for about 90 days. By month 9, she has a small portfolio. She raises her rates again. She is billing $1,500 per project with 6 consistent clients. That is $9,000 a month, $18,000 a year. Marcus, who has been on the belt for the same 9 months, is making $53,500. Now, you might say, yes, but benefits, stability, pay time off, and those are real. But here is the thing. On average, freelancers in the US earn about $99,230 per year. That is not the top performers. That is the average. The average freelancer is already out earning the average corporate salary in many fields. And they got there without a promotion cycle or a manager who decides when they are ready. This is the first big crack in the conveyor belt logic. The belt told people, if you stay on, you will eventually get where you want to go. But the belt has a speed limit, and the speed limit is controlled by the company, not by you. The second crack is bigger, and this one is psychological. Peak burnout now hits workers at age 25 for Gen Z, compared to 42 for the average American worker. Read that again. 25. The generation is burning out before they even hit their first real career milestone. They are burning out while they are still paying off student loans, while they are still figuring out how health insurance works, while they are still trying to impress people and what is causing it. The top workplace stress drivers are long working hours at 48% and inadequate recognition or reward at 48%. Long hours, no real reward. That is the deal. You are working the same hours as someone 3 levels above you and getting paid a fraction of what they make. And the only thing keeping you going is the promise that eventually, if you stay on the belt long enough, it will be your turn. That is not a career. That is a K. And Gen Z, who grew up watching their parents queue for decades and sometimes get restructured out of the queue without warning. Having witnessed millennials face the 2008 recession, massive COVID-19 layoffs, and ongoing corporate instability, Gen Z entered adulthood skeptical of traditional employment promises. They watched the contract get broken in real time. They watched people who were loyal get laid off. They watched companies do return to office mandates right after promising remote work was permanent. The contract was always one-sided, but now everyone can see it. So, let me introduce a mental framework I want you to hold on to for the rest of this video. I call it the 3 promises of the conveyor belt. These are the 3 things the corporate machine implicitly promises in exchange for your time. Promise 1, stability. If you stay, you will have consistent income and security. Promise 2, growth. If you perform, you will be promoted and compensated better over time. Promise 3, relevance. Your skills will develop and you will become more valuable the longer you stay. 3 promises. All 3 are currently broken, and not slightly broken structurally, systemically, verifiably broken. Let us go through them one by one because this is the core argument and I want to be precise. Promise 1, stability. Entry-level job postings made up just 38.6% of all postings in March, down from 44% in 2023. That is not a blip. Entry-level roles have dropped 29 percentage points since January 2024. Companies are not just laying people off. They are structurally reducing the number of entry points. They are making the belt shorter. Fewer people get on, and the ones who do have to compete harder just to get a starting position. Meanwhile, AI is automating the exact tasks that entry-level positions were built around. Block cut 40% of headcount due to AI efficiency, and Meta announced it was cutting 10% of its workforce amid heavy AI spending. You can frame that as forward-looking investment, or you can frame it as the belt is physically getting removed from the factory floor. The stability promise is gone, and everyone my age can see it. Promise 2, growth. 1 in 3 Gen Z employees plan to switch their jobs within the next 6 months, highlighting a growing empowerment disconnect. Why are they planning to leave? It is not a random restlessness. Only 39% of Gen Z feel equipped to succeed in their roles, down more than 20 points year over year. Employees value AI skills and upskilling. The company's idea of your growth and your idea of your growth are not the same idea. The company wants you to become a better version of a corporate employee. You want to become more valuable to the market, which sometimes means learning things the company does not use and does not care about. When those two trajectories diverge, and they almost always do, you have a problem. The belt is moving you toward a destination you did not choose. Comedic cutaway. I want you to imagine a 22-year-old in a performance review. His manager says, "We think you show real potential for a senior analyst role in about 3 to 4 years. If things continue on this trajectory," and he is sitting there thinking, "I could have a business generating $20,000 a month in 3 to 4 years. He nods and says, "That's really exciting to hear." Then he goes home and starts looking at domain names. Promise-free relevance. This one is quiet, but it is the most dangerous. The corporate machine specializes you. It narrows your skills toward the specific task the company needs. That was fine when companies were stable for decades and skills had long shelf lives. It is not fine now. Jobs requiring AI skills now offer a 56% wage premium over similar roles that don't, up from 25% the previous year, more than doubling. The skill that matters is evolving faster than any company can train you for it. And here is the trap. If you stay in a company that moves slowly, you fall behind the market. You stay relevant to the company and irrelevant to everyone else. Your skills become company-specific, not market transferable. You are not building equity. You are building local currency that only works inside this one building. GenZ is creating autonomous work options that compete with the lure of long-term employment incentives and opting instead for more control over the benefits and safety nets they establish for themselves. That is the rational response to a system that can no longer keep its 3 promises. Now, we are about halfway through the intellectual argument, and I want to go one level deeper because this is where it gets genuinely interesting. Everything I have said so far explains why the old deal no longer works. But it does not explain why Gen Z specifically is acting on it when previous generations did not. And here is the answer. It is not courage. It is cost of information. Think about how previous generations evaluated career options. The information available to a 22-year-old in 1997 was what my parents did, what my professor suggested, maybe what a career counselor had a pamphlet about. The comparison set was tiny. You knew that law and medicine paid well. You maybe knew a few people who started businesses, but you had no concrete visibility into what alternative paths actually look like financially day-to-day at scale. Today, that same 22-year-old has watched 17 videos of people documenting their freelance income. They have seen people break down their monthly revenue on TikTok. They have access to actual invoice templates, rate guides, client acquisition strategies, tax optimization structures, all free, all specific, all from people their age who are doing it right now. The information gap is closed, and once the information gap closes, the incentives become visible, and once the incentives are visible, the behavior changes. This is not a generation that is more rebellious. It is a generation that is more informed, and informed people make different choices. If you are finding this useful and you want to keep understanding how these systems actually work, not the motivational framing, just the mechanics, subscribe. That is basically what this channel is, systems, not slogans. Now let me introduce the mini case study because I want to show you how this plays out in real life with real numbers. Let us talk about 2 people same age 24. Both graduated from the same university with degrees in data analytics. Both are smart. Both work hard. One of them, let us call him Daniel, takes the traditional path. Junior data analyst position at a mid-size company, base salary of $58,000 a year. He gets his laptop. He gets his email. He gets his badge. He is on the belt. The other one, let us call her Priya, decides not to take any of the offers she receives. Instead, she spends month 1 learning how to position herself as a freelance data consultant. She builds a portfolio with free case studies from her college projects. She registers on 2 platforms. She prices herself low to start, $350 for a small analysis project. Month 1, She makes $1,400. It is bad. She almost gets back on the belt. Month 2, she lands one slightly bigger client. A smaller e-commerce company that wants customer segmentation analysis. She charges $900. She completes it. They like it. They ask for a second project. She quotes $1,200. They accept. She is now billing around $3,000 per month. Month 4, she raises her rates. She starts charging $2,500 per project. She completes one project every 2 weeks, $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. She has now surpassed Daniel's salary, and she has been doing this for 4 months. Month 8, she lands a retainer client, a startup that wants ongoing monthly dashboards. They agree to $4,000 a month for consistent work. She maintains 2 additional project clients. She is now at $12,000 a month, $144,000 a year. Daniel, 8 months in, has just received his first performance review. He is told he is doing excellent. He receives a 3% raise. They grew up reading different signals. They read follower accounts, client rosters, product launches, revenue disclosed in YouTube videos. Only 6% of Gen Z say their primary career goal is to reach a leadership position. 6% in a previous generation wanting to become a manager was so default it barely registered as a goal. It was just assumed. Now for 94% of the generation, the entire narrative of climbing toward leadership is simply not the dream. It was never really the dream for most people. But the culture reinforced it as the only legitimate one. That reinforcement no longer works. And this is not just about values. Despite what every HR think piece says, it is about visibility. When 50% of Gen Z respondents consider themselves to be creators, the alternative identity has become just as legible, just as socially recognized, just as status-conferring as the corporate title used to be. The conveyor belt used to be the only road to a visible destination. Now there are visible roads everywhere. The machine's social monopoly is broken. And that is a much bigger deal than any individual statistic about job tenure. Let me now talk about something that most financial channels will not say clearly because it disrupts a comfortable narrative. Gen Z's rejection of corporate careers is not purely rational. There is a psychological layer that I think is being underestimated, and it explains some of the more extreme ends of this trend. Dao's comprehensive 2025 survey of over 23,000 Gen Z workers reveals that 40% of Gen Zs feel stressed or anxious all or most of the time, with much of that stress stemming directly from their work environment. 40%, that is not a marginal group. That is close to half the generation operating in a chronic stress state while at work. Now this is important. I am not saying this to be sympathetic in a motivational sense. I am saying it because chronic stress impairs long-term decision-making. It shortens time horizons. It makes people prioritize immediate relief over long-term payoff. And a system that generates this level of stress in its entry-level participants is a system that is burning its own fuel. The machine is eating its own workforce and then being surprised that fewer people want to get in. Over 35% of Gen Z workers experience depression compared to 20% of workers overall. When the baseline rate of depression among your newest employees is 1.7 times the general population average, that is not a coincidence. That is a signal from the system about how the system is treating people. And here is where I need to make a distinction, because this is where the argument gets interesting. You could look at this and say Gen Z is just less resilient. They are complaining more. They need to toughen up. That is the discourse you hear from certain corners of the internet. But that analysis fails the incentives test. If you want to understand behavior, ask what behavior the system rewards. Does the corporate system reward people who endure stress and stay? Yes, with promotions eventually. Maybe. Does it reward people who leave when conditions are bad? Also, increasingly yes, because the outside market has better options and job hopping has demonstrably increased compensation faster than staying loyal. Gen Z's average job tenure is just 1.1 years compared to 2.8 for Gen X. But it is growth hunting, not job hopping, that drives this mobility. The system itself is selecting for people who move frequently. The loyalty premium has collapsed. The penalty for leaving has collapsed. So people leave not because they are weak, because the incentive to stay has been removed and the incentive to go has been installed. You think the problem is the workforce. The actual problem is the incentive structure. And this brings me to something that I think is the most underappreciated dynamic in this entire conversation. The conveyor belt, as I described it, assumes a specific labor market condition. It assumes that labor is relatively abundant and that companies have the leverage. The belt only works in a buyer's market for labor. When labor is scarce or when labor has credible outside options, the belt breaks down because people can simply walk off. The combination of the gig economy, AI-assisted skill development, global remote work, and information transparency has fundamentally shifted the leverage structure. In 2025, more than 70 million Americans are estimated to be part of the gig economy, representing approximately 36% of the total workforce. 36% of the workforce is not on the belt. They are operating in a parallel system, and that parallel system is growing while the belt is shrinking. Here is the number that I think should genuinely alarm anyone running a corporation right now. Projections indicate the freelance economy will occupy over 50% of the American workforce by 2027. Freelance work isn't new to Gen Z, who in their formative years experienced 94% of all job growth coming from alternative workforce arrangements. 94% of all job growth during Gen Z's formative years came from outside traditional employment. This generation grew up watching the economy grow through alternative structures. They did not grow up in a world where traditional jobs were the primary vehicle for economic mobility. The belt was already off to the side when they arrived. Now let me get to the part that most people miss, and this is the fourth level of the argument. We have talked about money. We have talked about stress and psychology. We have talked about status signals and information access. But there is a fourth force, and it is the most structural one. AI has restructured the skill value chain. Here is how the old skill value chain worked. You start a corporate job. You learn proprietary systems and internal processes. The longer you stay, the more you know about how that specific company works. That company-specific knowledge is valuable to the company but not very portable. You become entangled. You need the company because your skills are optimized for it. The company needs you because you know things that took years to learn. This mutual dependency was the hidden chain keeping people on the belt. While AI is cutting that chain because AI is now very good at the base layer of almost every knowledge work job. The data processing, the writing, the summarizing, the coding, the analysis, the task that used to require someone to spend 3 years building company-specific context before they were really useful. AI can do many of those tasks immediately without the context. Which means the comparative advantage of the long-tenure employee, their depth of company-specific knowledge is declining relative to someone who is sharp, current, and can leverage AI tools effectively. The people who are winning right now are not the ones who have been on the belt the longest. They are the ones who are best at using new tools quickly, and those people do not need the belt. They can apply their capabilities directly to the market. By 2025, 60% of freelancers are using AI-driven platforms for skill developments and task automation, up from just 35% in 2023. More significantly, 54% of freelancers now report advanced AI skills compared to only 38% of full-time employees. Let me say that slowly because it deserves to be said slowly. More than half of independent workers now report advanced AI skills. Fewer than 4 in 10 corporate employees do. The people who left the belt are outpacing the people who stayed in the exact capability that the next decade of the economy is going to be decided by. This is the inversion that nobody talks about. The conventional wisdom says go work at a company, get access to resources, training, mentorship, and build your skills faster than you would alone. That was true for a long time. It is increasingly not true. Companies are slower adopting new tools because adoption requires organizational consensus, IT approval, security review, and meeting with free departments. Independent workers adopt tools because they want to, and there is nobody to ask permission from. The training advantage of the corporate path is reversing. And when that reverses, the entire justification for the belt collapses. Here is the thing I want you to think about now, because we have been framing this as Gen Z abandoning the machine. But I want to flip it. What if the machine abandoned them first? The ZipRecruiter report found that entry-level job openings are drying up. Entry-level job postings made up just 38.6% of all postings in March, down from 44% in 2023. The front door of the belt got smaller. That has meant more applications per open role. The number of clicks per job opening increased by nearly 22% year-over-year, suggesting tougher odds for job seekers. People are competing harder for a belt that is simultaneously offering them less. I think a significant portion of the Gen Z corporate exit is not pure choice. It is rational adaptation to a system that has already contracted before they arrived. They are not storming out. They are responding to a market signal that says the expected return on this path is lower than it was for the people ahead of you. And they are right. The people who romanticize the traditional career path are often the people for whom it worked. People who entered the job market in the 90s or the early 2000s. A different era, different leverage structure, different information environment, different salary dynamics. They climbed the belt when the belt was faster, when promotions were more predictable, when company loyalty actually generated real financial returns. That world is gone. And telling people to behave as if it still exists is not wisdom. It is nostalgia dressed up as advice. Let me now give you the 3 things that I actually think matter practically, not as inspiration, as mechanics. The first thing that matters is separating income from employment. Most people think about these as the same thing. Income equals job equals income. But they are not the same structure. A job is a bundle. You sell your time in bulk. The buyer sets the price and the terms are controlled by the counterparty. Income is just money flowing to you in exchange for value. The value can be delivered in many different structures. The smartest thing anyone my age can do is spend serious time thinking about how to deliver value in structures other than the employment bundle. Not because jobs are morally wrong, because jobs are often the least efficient structure for converting skill into income. The second thing is understanding leverage. This is the word that separates the people who figure money out from the people who do not. Leverage means your output is not linear with your input. If you trade time for money, 100% of what you earn requires 100% of your hours. You have no leverage. If you have a product that sells while you sleep, or a client base that generates recurring revenue, or a skill that you can deploy simultaneously for multiple paying entities, your income can grow without a proportional increase in your time. The corporate machine offers almost no leverage to people below a certain level. You work, you get paid, you stop working, you stop getting paid. That is a structurally limited model. Building any amount of leverage, even small amounts, changes the math dramatically over time. The third thing, and this is the one people get wrong most consistently, is the difference between optionality and security. Corporate jobs are sold as security, but security means your downside is protected and your upside is uncapped. Corporate jobs protect neither. You can be laid off without warning, and your upside is capped by salary bands, promotion cycles, and the political dynamics of a single organization. What corporate jobs actually provide is legibility. They are recognizable to other people. They are easy to explain at family dinners. That is not the same as security. Real security comes from multiple income streams, transferable skills, and a network that exists outside of any single employer. That requires deliberately building outside the belt, even if you are still on it. Here is the part one want to come back to from the beginning. I said this was an incentive story, not a value story. And I want to close the loop on that. Every generation of young people has had doubts about the corporate world. Every generation has had people who questioned whether the trade was worth it. What is different about Gen Z is not that they are more questioning. What is different is that they have encountered the system at the exact moment when the incentive structure is shifted against staying, and they have access to the information and tools to act on that shift. It's unclear if the traditional way up the corporate ladder will ever return. That quote is from a labor economist, not a social media influencer. It is a structural observation. The belt is not slowing down temporarily. is being redesigned in a way that makes it less attractive for the people who are being asked to get on. The companies that figure this out, that the old social contract is broken and a new one needs to be written, will attract the Gen Z talent that is actually worth attracting. Industries like IT, healthcare, and financial services are already seeing stronger attention where roles align with Gen Z's long-term goals. When employers provide visible career paths, purpose-driven roles, and relevant upskilling, Gen Z is ready to commit. It is not that Gen Z refuses to work within any institutional structure. It is that they refuse to work within a structure that cannot demonstrate its value to them in terms they understand. The companies that can make that case with real numbers, real paths, real skill developments will not have a retention problem. The ones that cannot will continue to lose people to their own laptops. And look, I am not saying every 22-year-old should immediately quit their job and freelance. That is not the argument. Some people are better suited to structure. Some industries still have genuine on-ramp advantages from inside companies. Some skills genuinely require institutional context to develop properly. The argument is not that the belt is always bad. The argument is that the belt used to be the obvious choice and now it is one choice among several with real trade-offs that deserve honest analysis. The honest analysis says the returns on the belt have declined, the friction to exit has declined, and the quality of alternatives has improved. Those three things together produce the behavioral shift we are observing. Freelancing is no longer a transitive phase or stepping stone to a real job. This generation values the financial benefits, flexibility, and control of freelancing and is building their careers around it. The conveyor belt metaphor that I started with. Here is the final version of it. The belt still exists. It is still running. It is just no longer the only way across the factory floor. There are now forklifts, side doors, ladders to the ceiling, and a hole in the wall that someone cut with a laptop and a decent Wi-Fi connection. The people who insist on waiting in line for the belt are not more disciplined, that they are less informed about what the factory floor actually looks like in 2026. 1. That is the story, not a value shift, not lazy kids. A broken incentive structure, a new information environment, and a generation that arrived just early enough to notice. If this framing is useful to you, subscribe. I break down systems like this regularly and I do not add filler to hit an algorithm.